Hello and welcome to Star Trek Sundays. Today's episode is Eccentrics, Good versus Evil, in which we'll discuss two eccentrics and what their motives might be as presented and contemplated through Star Trek. If you're new here, I'm Victoria, and with me is my co-host T. Star Trek Sundays is a podcast through which we and our guest crew examine the philosophical themes presented in Star Trek, every Sunday at 10 a.m. PST on Clubhouse. Our goal is not to come to conclusions on the themes we discuss, but to spark contemplation and conversation, which we hope continues after the live recording and into the lives of the listeners of the podcast. At the top of the room, we have pinned our Star Trek Sundays website, StarTrekSundays.com. There you'll find our links to our published podcasts, my Captain's Log and guest blogs, links to our upcoming watch lists, and our Star Trek Sundays trading post. The Star Trek Sundays podcast is available 1 week after the live show on Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and from anywhere else you get your podcasts. Please consider subscribing to our channels as it helps us reach others who might enjoy the show. T, these were two more great episodes that fill in Data's story arc a little bit more. Before we talk about the episode and what's upcoming, can you tell me your general thoughts about how Star Trek addressed the idea of eccentrics and exposed their goodness and evilness? And then tell us how you came to curate the episodes we watched this week.
You bet, Victoria, and thank you. Eccentricity refers to a person's unusual or quirky behavior that sets them apart from others, often in a positive or endearing way. Eccentric individuals may have peculiar habits or interests, and the characters in Star Trek always find a way to push those habits to the extreme. As Trekkies, we're well aware of Star Trek's rich history of exploring complex and thought-provoking themes, and with this week's topic, it's no exception. With its multitudes of richly diverse and quirky characters, Star Trek has expertly tackled the concept of eccentricity, offering a multitude of memorable and truly captivating portrayals of individuals who march to the beat of their own drum. In addition, Star Trek has never shied away from the timeless struggle between good and evil, and has, in fact, tackled this complex and often controversial subject with remarkable insight and nuance. From the Klingons' relentless pursuit of power to the Romulans' insatiable thirst for conquest, Star Trek has consistently blurred the lines between good and evil, creating a captivating and highly thought-provoking examination of the human condition. I chose these two Star Trek Next Generation episodes, Brothers and The Most Toys, to explore the theme of eccentricity and the struggle between good and evil because they really put that struggle in the spotlight. These episodes feature eccentric characters Dr. Soong and Fajo, who blur the line between right and wrong and raise questions about consequences of our actions and the morality of the world around us. So I'm excited for an in-depth discussion of eccentrics, good versus evil.
Thanks for that, T. That's great. Well, let's start with The Most Toys. Can you provide a summary of the episode The Most Toys to remind those who didn't get a chance to review it what it was about? And then I have a question for you.
Definitely. I remember being on the edge of my seat the first time I watched this as a small child, or as a teenager. The Most Toys from The Next Generation Season 3, Episode 22, first aired on the 7th of May in 1990. In The Most Toys, while transferring material from a trader's vessel to the Enterprise, Data is believed to have died in a shuttlecraft explosion, when in fact he's been kidnapped by the trader, who is a collector of one-of-a-kind collectibles. I chose this episode because Fajo is a very eccentric character with a lot of expressive characteristics and a very strong need to possess things that makes him an interesting case study.
Indeed, thank you. Yeah, there was so much to like about this episode. I love Data's refusal to comply with Fajo's demand to perform. That was just awesome. We were like, go Data, right? With respect to the eccentricities of Fajo, I found it difficult to flip the script on this one and see him or his eccentricities as good at all. And I really enjoyed the exercise of trying to do so, as you put it to us. What was interesting in what you just said now, that he had a strong need to possess things that make him an interesting case study. As you were saying it, I was thinking that you were going to say he has a very strong need to possess things that make him an interesting person, because that seemed to be his motive. Wasn't because he just loved these things, but because of how they showed him off to his friends. Obviously, collecting can go too far, as seen in the most toys. But to what extent can it be healthy? So I want to put it to you and the crew. I'm wondering, do you have a collection that you love? And why do you love it? And a twist, do you think that a collection represents the owner's own eccentricities?
Yes, I do. I'm a fan of art, and so I have an art collection. And that art expresses itself in a couple of different ways. One of the ways that it expresses itself is in supporting artists that I like. So I'll just buy their art when I see it from coming from them because I really like it. But I tend to target sort of independent artists and support them pretty exclusively until I find, another artist which I add to my, art collection, as it were. And then the other part of that is I actually spend a bit of time working on photos of my own from real life, and editing them and putting them together in, stuff like that. And it's one of those things where I used to really enjoy this a lot. Taking photos, I used to have a camera that I took with me everywhere, and it was one of those things that to this day I still go back and look at the collections sometimes, and I'm really proud of them because it's one of the things that reminds me of the past and keeps me grounded to where I came from. And I tend to forget things a little bit, and not just just because I'm getting older, and I tend to forget, and then when I go back and I see the memories, it brings back other memories and helps me not forget the things that I think I should probably remember.
That is really interesting. The thing about memory is interesting, and I know we've talked about this with a few people and some of the crew in the past. And one of the things I said about memory and forgetting was that if you've forgotten it, then you're not really suffering, right? It's only when somebody reminds you of something and then you forget. I know what you mean, though. When I find something and it reminds me of a time that I hadn't thought about in a long time, I get like a bit of a rush, which is great. But in the meantime, I don't feel like I've missed out on anything. So maybe memory and reminiscing is something that we should talk about at some point, because I do know that Star Trek has covered like why do people like why do people collect things, or why do they have sentimental items. So that's something to explore as well. Okay, well, welcome to the stage, Gela, Babs, Twist, Steve, Rachel. We'll start with you, Gela. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it?
I have what might be called a collection of stuffed animals that were mine from a young age. I pretend that they are my daughter's now. They are in her room, but they're really still mine. Um, and the other thing is I collect people. Um, that sounds a little bit like Fajo, but what I mean is that I keep track of people who I have, from all parts of my life. And people do like a culling of their Facebook friends list. I very rarely do that because I want to randomly come across somebody I haven't thought about in a long time and reach out and say, "Hey, haven't we haven't talked in a very long time," and see what happens. Uh, so those are two things that one could what one might call collections.
Great. Thank you for that, Kella. Babs, are you available to answer the question? Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it?
I do think that collections speak to the per se the identity of the collector. Um, I have two collections. One, I had to declutter a lot of my stuffed animals, so don't feel bad, Gella. Um, I have my Squishmallow collection. I trimmed it down to just Squishmallows and a couple special ones. So I have like 11 stuffed animals there. And then the piece de resistance, the biggest collection I have is my collection of cat items. Um, yes, I am a crazy cat lady. Yes, it's true. I live like a spinster at 32 years old. Um, I have cat things everywhere in my bedroom. Uh, figurines, uh, stuffed animals, of course. I have a tapestry that is a cat mandala. I have another tapestry that's a watercolor lion's head. Um, 4 of my 7 tattoos are cats. So, um, I'm a little bit of a crazy cat lady. So yeah.
Oh, that's fun. That's great. Welcome to the stage. We've got more people on stage: Jamesy, Marcus, Johnny, Sin. I know everybody will have something to share because I know each of you a little bit too. So we'll move on to Twist. Hey, Twist, thanks for coming. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it?
I do. I have two different types of collections. I'm a lepidopterist, so I have a collection of butterflies in cases. If this is supposed to be a testament to the type of person that I am, I have no idea what it means, especially when it comes to the second thing I collect, which is miniature spoons. I don't know why. I just really, really like them. I like both of them. I like the way that they both look. I love the way that butterflies just are shaped. I think they're gorgeous. I think they're amazing. The iridescence on some of the wings are just incredible. I like looking at their Latin names. When it comes to the antique spoons, on the other hand, it's the antiquity of them. The older the spoon, the smaller the spoon, the more handcrafted it is, the more interested I am. I have one particular spoon that I really, really love, and it is you could see all the dents from where the gentleman or whomever smithed this silver spoon. Most of these small little spoons are ones that you would put in little honey pots. You know, when you serve tea, like fine tea dining or anything like that. The rest of them I have no idea what their original use was. I have another one that I really really appreciate that actually says 19 or 1842 now cooking with gas. It was an advertisement. They used to this spoon was used as an advertisement. So I just love the history and the antiquity when it comes to spoons, and I love the symmetry and beauty of the butterflies.
Thank you. So it's interesting. So I have um, partly by sort of inheritance, some collector spoons. You know, those little ones that would have like a little, um, Eiffel Tower on the top, and people would hang them in a cabinet or something and show off all these spoons from traveling. So I have a couple from my aunt, and I actually use them for spoons for tea and coffee. Do you use your collector spoons?
I do not. I do not. I do not even. I barely even touch them with my bare skin. A lot of
Oh,
them are silver, and so I would wear gloves to have to polish them so that they don't tarnish.
wow, true collector. Very nice. Okay. Steve, on to you. Thank you again for hosting the watch party. So let me put the question to you then. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it? And if you want to share, what do you think that represents about you and your eccentricities?
You know what? I would have to point to my DVD collection. I've been collecting DVDs of every movie and show that I just thought was awesome and wanted to just keep forever. I keep them in these bundles. I've got loads of series and movies, a lot of them stuff that I just think of as like it's such classic film, and it really deserves to be an education of its own right, of like life skills. And I think what that says about me, probably stems a lot from the fact that, as I explained to a lot of people, I was in part raised by the television, so it was pretty much all I had as a kid was TV, some video games. Not even like able to like buy what video games I wanted, but just I got what I had and I made the best of it. And I had a lot of issues like where I might go to school like a 2-hour drive away from where I lived, so there was no real like making friends after school for me. And it was really hard. Maybe what that could say about me as an eccentric is that I really appreciate the art form of performance.
Thank you for that, Steve. Rachel, how about you? Do you have a collection that you love? And can you tell us why you love it?
Well, the first thing I think of is my collection of books and journals. Like I just love collecting them, and I have like tons of journals that are really, they're either like very special journals, like specialty ones, or they're just beautiful, or like their cover's just beautiful and it appealed to me. And so I have a bunch that I haven't even written in yet. So I hope to fill them out one day. But the thing why books meant so much to me is when I was younger, I fell in love with stories through the books I read, and it became a form of escape for me from what I was dealing with. And they books became like my friends and my friends and my company, and they really helped me through a lot of years of hard stuff that I went through. And so they're really special to me. What it means about me, I think, is that I'm a storyteller as well, and so I appreciate other storytellers.
I
Oh,
love that
great.
so much. I'm so the whole thing about storytelling, and I see the same thing with what Steve said about um, DVDs. Steve, do you watch the DVDs? Do you get them out and put them on?
I actually get them out often for watch parties with friends. Like we go, we should watch a movie, and I'm like, I'm bringing my whole collection.
I feel like that's just another form of storytelling, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that, Rachel and Steve. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed. I was going to ask T what, what he was thinking, so because that was a great timing there, T. Let's move to you, Jamesy. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it?
So I've had a lot of costumes over the years, and I've always saved like a piece of all those costumes. So my costume wardrobe is like always kind of fun for me to look at and try to figure out how to like blend two characters together for a thing that I want to do. Um, I really related to the DVD collection thing because I think very hard about what DVDs I want to be on display. If somebody comes and is a guest in my home, I feel like we kind of I'm trained to kind of look at what DVDs people have to be noticed. What are the movies or the books that these people want to be defined by? But the collection that I think is probably the most interesting for me is I have this really quirky rock collection where they don't end up together. Some of them end up in aquariums, some of them end up in the yard. But pretty much every time I go somewhere, I have this idea of like, if I take something from here, then like it makes the memory more real. And it's true because when I'm cleaning my aquarium or when I'm gardening, it reminds me of those vacations or those events.
Wow, there seems to be a pattern then. So the collections are not only because they're beautiful, but often people collect things as souvenirs. That's interesting. Marcus, how about you? Welcome to Star Trek Sundays. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it?
Yeah, I have a few with a running theme through them. The first one would be, which is unfair to call it a collection because as quickly as I collect them, I also give them away, and this is part of my practice in non-attachment. And these are hand-carved pendants, and I like to get them from the artist that creates them. I get to enjoy them for a while, but then I'll give those away. The second one is my art collection, which is largely in storage. And this is because one day I want to open up a plant medicine retreat, and I want these pieces of art there for visitors to enjoy. And the third one is a collection of precious and semi-precious gemstones. I've tried to collect as varied as a number of them as I possibly can. And there's an intention behind these that comes from an experience I had on like walks in these kind of spiritualist groups, people that are getting together to, just experience each other really, and be at one with ourselves and nature and whatnot. And I would bring semi-precious gemstone beads. As I laid them all out so that people could make their own bracelets, they really were just so captivated by them and the beauty of them, and there's an experience there of exploring the different kinds, and I just saw them really engrossed in that experience. So with this collection of gemstones I have now, the intention is to set them into a resin table, and this resin table would be in my retreat in the future. And the purpose of it is to create an experience, the experience of, being able to see all the stones. People might know what some of them are, but not know what all of them are. And they get to explore that. And it's this inquisitive, nature that I like. And I'm trying to create that experience with the table. So I would say that the common link here is that I like to bring beautiful experiences to people, more so than I just enjoy accumulating these. I do intend for them to be enjoyed by others.
I really like that, Marcus. And I've heard you say this before, that you collect things and then you give them away. And I think that I sit with that sometimes, because I think that would help me be able to appreciate the joy I get when I end up acquiring something. But there's also a joy in letting it go, not just because it frees me up to have space for something new in my life, but also it's a joy to be able to please somebody else with the gift or something special. So I'm going to think more on that. I really appreciate that. Sin, welcome back to Star Trek Sundays. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love it?
I do collect things, and let's see. There's a lot of things I collect. I can say that the most important things I've collected really are probably the one would be plays that I've done. For me, it's just like when I do a play, like afterwards that, I always save those scripts that we have. Usually go and you buy your own copy or make an enlarged one so you can do lots of notes and stuff. So they, by the end of your rehearsal process and doing the whole show, you've created kind of a family within that structure of that show. Whether it's the crew and the cast or both, it's you have like a miniature family for that time period, and everyone's super engulfed into that world, and when you're with a group of artists that are very dedicated to it, it's easy to just, get into the believability of it. I guess the other thing that I really collect is my experiences like playing music and having instruments. I have tons of musical gear that I just can't seem to let go of, and I use a lot of it. And so, yeah, that's basically it.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's nice that you've got a collection of things that you've used, either memories of scripts that you've had, but as well as the instruments that you have. And if you make that into a collection, perhaps you'll collect instruments you don't yet know how to play, but you learn how to play. So that's really fun. T, did you have any interaction before we move on to Stu and Ryan?
Well, I absolutely love the instruments because I think that collecting skills is a great way to go about collecting and a healthy way to go about collecting. And so, right on for that. And, being into music is just, yeah, absolutely. I get that.
Thank you. Stu, how about you? Thanks for coming to Star Trek Sundays. I know it's really late for you, so I appreciate you staying up for it. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love that collection?
I don't really have a collection of material things. I think I don't tend to get attached to a lot of material objects. I do have a collection I keep of software of old computer systems that I really like to mess around with, what they call emulators. So, the old I used to have a Commodore 64, a BBC Micro, all the old 8-bit computers and the games and the programming. And I do like to run those things every once in a while. It's very nostalgic to go back to those old days of messing around on those machines. I also like to make what they call emulation stations, which is like a little thing you can plug into a TV to play the games. And sometimes I'll go and see friends and bring it with me, or go see family. And if they want to sit down, and because sometimes I'll have someone who also grew up with those games or arcade games, and they can play those games and enjoy playing them. So yeah, that's my collection, would be related to software and old computer games and stuff.
That is super cool. I'm sure they love doing that because, yeah, it's like old toys, but computer stuff. That's really neat. Okay. Ryan, thanks for coming to Star Trek Sundays. Do you have a collection that you love, and why do you love that collection?
Yeah, so I started collecting comic books around 1990, and I collected comic books till I was about 24. And so I have, a few boxes of books that I've sort of carried around with me since I was like 10 or 11, and expanded on. And at one point, that's just how I explored storytelling, right? Explored through comic books. And that was the lens that I looked at the world through, was these superheroes and anti-heroes and dark characters. Because for a while there I was really into like things like The Crow and kitchen sink press type comic books. And I met a lot of really cool people that way, going to San Diego Comic-Con, going to comic book stores. And in the 1990s, comic book stores were not segregated necessarily, but there was at least two sides to the store, right? You were the gamer playing Magic cards on one side, or you were on the other side looking at artwork and talking about artwork and looking at stories. And it was a magical time period for sure.
Thank you for that, Ryan. Wow, I had no idea how deep and varied this conversation would be. I love it. And thank you, everybody, for sharing about how you collect and why you collect and what you collect. It's great. Really appreciate that. This is Star Trek Sundays on Clubhouse. Our regular show is Sunday at 10 a.m. PST. To be notified of future shows, please join the club on Clubhouse and our mailing list at StarTrekSundays.com. Today we are discussing Eccentrics, good versus evil. Before we move on to Brothers, T, can you tell us what we have coming up for the next week?
Coming up on Sunday, February 12th, is The Burden of Command. Starting with Redemption from the Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 26, which first aired on the 17th of June in 1991, and is a season-ending cliffhanger to the next episode in the watch party. In this episode, Picard balances his Federation and Klingon duties as the new Klingon Chancellor Goron faces a civil war. Worf and his brother Kurn fight to regain their father's honor, followed by Redemption 2, which is Season 5, Episode 1, first aired on the 23rd of September, 1991. So, as the House of Duras is nearing victory over Worf and the forces of Goron, Starfleet, led by Picard, works to expose Romulan interference in the Klingon Civil War. followed by The Siege of AR-558 from Deep Space Nine, Season 7, Episode 8, which first aired on the 18th of November in 1998. In this episode, during a supply run to AR-558, Cisco finds the defending Starfleet unit with over two-thirds of the troops dead, and the remaining soldiers' morale extremely low. When the Defiant comes under attack, Cisco, Bashir, Dax, Nog, and Quark choose to remain on the planet, which is about to come under attack by a much larger contingent of Jem'Hadar soldiers.
Well, that is going to be a little bit of a change of pace from what we've been doing so far, but I'm really looking forward to this episode and what inspired us to do it. So stay tuned for that next week. So thank you for that. Let's move on to Brothers. Can you provide a summary of the episode to remind those who didn't get a chance to review it what it was about? And then I have a question for you.
You bet. So, Brothers from the Next Generation, Season 4, Episode 3, first aired on the 8th of October, 1990. In this episode, Data experiences an unusual malfunction and takes control of the Enterprise. He finds that he has been summoned by Dr. Noonien Soong, who had been believed to be dead. I chose this episode because Dr. Soong presents a moving target for good versus evil, and watching Brent Spiner play a triple role added an extra layer of flavor.
Too true. Thank you for that. Man, I loved this episode. And yeah, what a performance by Brent Spiner in 3 roles. And you had said this, and I totally agree with you when you said that no one else in the cast could have carried that off as well. You know, we were contemplating who could do a double role, who could do this, right? And Brent Spiner was just wonderful, as was the editing. It was great. I hope we can revisit this episode in part when we do a show about parenting, because the one scene in which the brothers were struggling with their positions in the family and their jealousy over the other with respect to their father's love was really fascinating and so true to the real world. As I said yesterday, after the episode aired, I'm sure some of the writers were questioned by their families the next Christmas. Was that meant to be me? You weren't supposed to tell them that. So, in the meantime, my question: Dr. Soong had the unique ability to create new forms of cybernetic life. Can the development of AI and artificial life be viewed as a necessary step towards a brighter future, or a reckless exploitation of technology that could lead to disastrous consequences?
Oh, it's such an interesting question, because to paint Noonien Soong in a good light is to spotlight his advances in cybernetic life forms and the positronic brain, and how he figured out how to prevent the neural collapse, which gave birth to lore and then subsequently Data. And by many means, this was a technological advancement. But at the same time, he also chose to create in his image. In many ways, he saw himself as transcending his very biology, as creating life forms that were how he thought they should be. And so I think that ultimately does lead to a very dangerous path where we start creating inventions which are capable of taking control of us, right? And I think that we're not that far off from that possibility. We have to tread very carefully when it comes to this type of work of like artificial life, for example. That isn't to say that we shouldn't do it, because we're going to have to. I feel it's inevitable. We have to advance technology. It doesn't make sense not to advanced technology, but we have to do so in a thoughtful way, such that we create things that are ultimately, not at the point at which we talked about this last time, at the point at which they are capable of asking for autonomy, that we can trust them to do that without creating havoc. So I think that there's a series of decision trees, and a lot of them end in nightmares there. And I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, this was interesting because I know when we first, when you curated these 2 episodes, I thought, well, there's clearly one evil and one good. And I saw Dr. Sung as the good. And then you asked us to flip the script and say, could we see Fajo as good and Sung as evil? And I just couldn't see Fajo as good. But with Sung, it was much deeper, and it really made me think of a lot of different aspects of eccentrics now in real life and what they do, and perhaps we'll get into that. So I really thank you for this contemplation. I'm going to start at the bottom of the stage, and I'm going to go to Ryan and ask Ryan this question. Can the development of AI and artificial life be viewed as a necessary step towards a brighter future, or a reckless exploitation of technology that could lead to disastrous consequences? Dun, dun, dun.
Well, I would say both. I mean, the concept of humans building synthetic humans has been an innate desire in us since the stories of the golem in ancient, Jewish mysticism. Um, and so this idea of the technology being both our doom and salvation has always been the case and will continue being the case because it's the double-edged sword, right?
Indeed. Indeed.
Well, yeah, so like antibiotics. On one side, they save thousands of people, but now, after decades of abuse, we are at a point where there is antibiotic resistant bacteria that is only going to get worse. And that's something that we did. We did that, right? Through our technologies. Nobody else.
Right. And I wonder where that tipping point is then, right? Because we would never say that we shouldn't have come up with antibiotics. So that's interesting. We'll have to learn from what we've done in the past that's been disastrous in order to avoid it. Would you say that we could learn that, or are we always doomed?
Well, it's evolution in a sense, right? Those who die and don't reproduce get left behind, and those who are able to reproduce move forward. And we're, you know, at a time, like if you listen to Ray Kurzweil and other futurists, we're like a decade or two away from what's known as the technological singularity, a moment where a human can no longer imagine what comes next. And that's a legitimate concern for a lot of us, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a concern and it's exciting in some way. So thank you for that, Ryan. Stu, what do you think? Have you considered this, and can the development of AI and artificial life be viewed as a necessary step towards a brighter future, or a reckless exploitation of technology that could lead to disastrous consequences?
I guess that's a question that the people programming the AIs are going to have to answer. I mean, they're at the end of the day the people who are going to be putting these algorithms into the AIs. They're the ones who are going to be setting up the checks and balances of what the AI can do. Um, so an AI that has sentience but is an isolated unit, completely closed off from the world, can't really do much, right? But if you have an AI, for example, that has access to, for example, in the far future of um, being able to generate on the atomic scale, replicate things or things like that, then you could end up with problems if the checks and balances aren't in place as to what the algorithm can do. Because if it's learning and learning and learning, and there's no checks and balances, um, that's what concerns me. But I think on the flip side, the good thing is AI. If there's obviously going to be a human limit of, despite our medical advances, the human body is still going to have a limit to the amount of age. So we've got two options. We can either say, well, are we going to do it by cloning? Is that how we come to some level of immortality? Or could AI provide us with a way, artificial, once we can map AI and we can find the symmetry between human consciousness in a way that can be mapped to a computer, could this provide us with a sort of immortality? So longevity. So I guess they're questions that a positive thing that AI could bring.
Excellent. Thank you. T, any response to Ryan and Stu? I always have to ask you when someone brings up programmers.
Yeah, I think that what they're saying is brilliant in that we already see the how weak emergence can draw out seemingly sentient machines that are capable of language, of creating language models that are incredibly potent in terms of understanding and synthesizing information and taking, large unstructured information and turning it into structured information very, very quickly. Like a 5-year-old who's capable of Googling the internet and reading thousands of documents at once, and then a second later, sort of, giving a basic understanding of what they just read. And so I think that when we see more of these types of weak emergence motivate towards strong emergence, where they are undergoing evolutionary processes and self-correcting and undergoing natural selection and things like that, we're going to see more of these types of problems. And this is where the struggle is going to come in, and we are going to have to find a plateau, or at least a stable line along which we can crawl, to where we don't develop these things so fast that we can't that we also don't develop the technologies to help us control these things in such a way that generates fairness, that generates a new life form that can choose to join the Federation because that seems like a good choice for what they want, and is capable of being a productive member of society autonomously. And then we have to be careful about, not just generating stuff that wipes everybody off the planet.
Right. So, speaking of creatures who can join the Federation because that's what they want, it's interesting because I didn't hear Data say he wanted to do that. Fajo asked him, why did you join the Federation? And he said it seemed, I'm paraphrasing here, but it seemed a reasonable match for his capabilities or something. But I get the impression that he wanted to do it, that there's some feeling of achievement. I mean, we see that he's kept his medals of honor. And the other thing that came up when Stu was talking and what you were saying from these episodes was, I still go back to that point when Data refused to comply with Fajo's request to perform, when Fajo wanted to show off his new acquisition, that is Data, to another collector. And Data just stayed still and pretended to be a mannequin type of thing. And I wonder what that is in what you guys were saying. Like, he was clearly strategizing, thinking, I'm going to become useless to this person. He wants to show off how real I am, and I refuse to do that. And that seems like strategizing. And I don't know whether he'd be programmed to do that or whether that's something he might have learned through Starfleet. I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that.
Well, I think he knows that he's an object of interest. I think he can compute that, right? Is that he has this keen interest in making him subservient to his desires. And so, in turn, he chooses to not be interesting because that's how you deal with a narcissist. Is if they're looking for your attention towards them, then you don't give them the attention, right? And so he was doing that back. He was saying, okay, well, what is it he wants? I'm not going to give it to him, and if I do this enough, his interest in me will wane, and therefore he will just simply get rid of me.
Right. Yeah. When you said narcissist, I was reminded of a term, I think it's called gray rock, when you just don't react. Once again, Star Trek was way ahead of the trend in how to deal with these people. So brilliant, and kudos to them. Thank you for that. Marcus, what do you think about all this? Is this AI and artificial life a necessary step towards a brighter future? Or is this going to lead to disastrous consequences?
I don't think it's a necessary step for a brighter future. I think that the necessary steps for a brighter future are, inward contemplation and cultivating compassion and kindness between people, and bringing those boundaries between ourselves and the other, and bringing people together in that way. I think ultimately that is what would give us a brighter future. But as with any kind of technology, it's really how it's going to be used is going to be a reflection of the people using it. So longer as there's people that want to use this to harm others or to, control other people, then there's always the potential for it to be used that way. At the same time, I think that human beings are very creative creatures, and if we can dream it, we'll probably try and make it. So I think it's inevitable that we're going down like this route, and I think that it will have, very positive application. But in terms of it being necessary, no, I do not think it is necessary. I actually think that the cultivation of compassion between all people is what will actually help us to use these tools in a way that is compassionate and useful, and not going to be used to harm or control others.
Thank you. That's a great contribution. I tend to agree with that. Yeah, we can at least start there. Well, some of us are making these advancements. Others who can't contribute to that can at least contribute to advancing our compassion towards each other. I really like that. Thank you, Marcus. Jamesy, how about you? Can the development of an AI and artificial life be viewed as a necessary step towards a brighter future, or a reckless exploitation of technology that could lead to disastrous consequences?
Well, in the same way the universe may in fact be designed to create black holes, uh, like as far as life not being sustainable in the distant future, like our purpose may be to design life that extends our current conception of life, and that just may be like what it is. When people get kind of become advocates for fearing AI and negative singularity events and stuff, I think it speaks to like a real abundance of privilege. If you want people to be afraid of something that's 2 or 20 or 200 years away, when they're trying to figure out how to put food on the table tonight, like you're just not going to be able to onboard them to that being a problem. They just have more immediate problems. And I think like that aspect of the human condition should probably be addressed before we get too wrapped up in worrying about these kind of far out sci-fi in-game analysis.
Good points. T, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it's one of those things where we will walk the path that leads to our um, leads to our success in this matter, or we're going to just simply blow ourselves up one day and it's going to be lights out. And I don't think that the doomsday scenario is likely. I just think it's something that, as developers, we sort of need to be aware of and conscious of. And when I encountered what I called a Oppenheimer moment of my own, I had to take a step back and realize that what I was developing was trivial to weaponize. As a result, I went in a different direction with it. And so, it's one of those things where if you don't know the potential for a gun and you don't have proper regulations, you should probably be thinking twice about making a gun. Now, if you have a need, sure, I get it, no problem. But if everything's cool and you're just sitting around and thinking about you know, how you can create code or pieces of metal, whatever it is, that are going to kill people, that's maybe something you should think twice about, and that's the point that I'm making.
Yeah, T, my criticism was directed much more at like the Sam Harris types than you. I don't see you as like a problem on that curve.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, gentlemen. I certainly do Agree with that last message. T, any thoughts?
It really is an interesting time that we live in, and we have so much potential that we don't realize unless we seek these types of technologies that really can bring about an end to fighting, an end to hunger, an end to war, even. Um, and I think that's why these discussions are so important, is because we have to be forward thinking about this stuff. We have to discuss it. We have to drag it out of the 1990s and into the 2022s and 2023s, and make it relevant and make it important because it's happening. Because back then, these types of things were just sort of like, fiction, and now we're sort of dealing with faction, if you will.
Yeah, we certainly are. Yeah, we are. Science fiction to science fact, for sure. Let me just put the question to you, Babs.
Mhm.
Can the development of AI and artificial life be viewed as a necessary step towards a brighter future, or a reckless exploitation of technology that could lead to disastrous consequences?
I kind of agree with Ryan. I think both. You know, with late stage capitalism being the way it is, of course, it was only a matter of time before we would find a way to work cheaper. Um, so I think in that regard, could possible job loss in the future be a problem? Yes. Because if humans aren't needed for jobs anymore, then yeah, that would be a huge problem. But that said, I also think it would be a good thing just for the fact that there's so much that we can do with AI, and there's so much that we don't know that AI can do yet that we've yet to discover, I would think. I don't know. I haven't done too much looking into AI, to be honest. I'm kind of a spinster. So, that said, I think it has benefits on both sides, or pros and cons.
Right. Yeah. The job loss thing is something we haven't yet to talk about, and I think that's really interesting because there's some people who worry about it, and then there's some people who say, well, if everybody had a basic income, then we wouldn't have to worry about it. And those who want to earn more because they've got a special skill or something to offer, then that would be fine. And so that's an interesting conversation to have as well. So I'm glad that you brought that up. T, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I definitely would just like to echo the sentiment in that it's one of those things that we really do have to focus on moving forward, and so I'm glad it was brought up.
Thanks. Your contributions have been absolutely phenomenal today. This is just a great conversation, lots to take away. So I want to thank you for that. Ryan, did you have any thoughts on the episode itself? We haven't talked much Star Trek today. We've talked all about these hypotheticals. Did you have any thoughts on Brothers? Because it was a great episode for me.
Yeah, I absolutely adore this episode. It's so heartfelt. It's so interesting, and to me, it brings up issues that people didn't discuss or anticipate in previous episodes about Data. Specifically, the episode where they put him on trial to see if he's alive, and no one in the crew ever considered that Data could just decide he's over this court case and walk out. And in Brothers, we see what kind of damage Data can do if he applies himself to surviving at any cost. He took over the Enterprise in like 5 minutes flat, and no one could stop him. And that to me is something that's rarely ever explored with Data.
Right now, so I understood that he wasn't doing it so much as it was the beacon that was sent out from Sung that took over him because he wouldn't have chosen to do that. I mean, we see at the end he apologizes because he doesn't even remember that he's done that, and he says, "I can't remember exactly the quote, but when he remembers it, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that I caused so much problem."
Well,
Right?
yeah, but that was his subconscious, you could say. Like his beacon and other things that Sung has put in
Mm.
there almost work as a subconscious. And, when you put baby in a corner, baby's going to fight back. And that's the thing. We've never seen Data really fight back. Um, and I think that's something that the episode really shines a light on.
Great. Anybody else have any thoughts on either of the episodes before we close down and head over to a little bit of a looser after party with Steve?
Yeah, I was just really moved by the ending when Data said to Nguyen, I won't be able to grieve for you. And he said to him, you will in your own way. And you can see Data processing that for a moment, like trying to think, wait, but I don't have an emotion. How can I grieve? And he was saying, well, he still may process over it because he is a being, and the whole Data's entire arc throughout the Next Generation has been about him becoming more human. And so he's realizing, I think, that even though he might not be capable of emotion, that does not mean that he might have wanted or at least sought more interactions with his surrogate father. So yeah, I was really moved by that comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that I've thought about a bit, and perhaps I've talked to T about this, we'll have to bring it up, is there's so much in these episodes, and especially when we talk about Data, like not having emotion, when I think a lot of us can see that he has emotion. He just doesn't express it the same way that a human does. And I think there's some messages there about neurodiversity, and I'm looking forward to covering that a little bit, because I think it's really important. And definitely there would have been neurodiverse people on the writing team and on the cast and all the contributors to these wonderful shows. So uh, it's interesting, because I think when we look at these characters, as we do here in Star Trek Sundays, we're able to think about the things we experience in our own lives in a different way. They help us to feel something for, say, an android or a person, because we all care about Data, who doesn't have emotion. And perhaps that's one of the things that we can do, getting to Marcus and Rachel's point and a few others, of treating other people better, is if we can care for Data, then we certainly can care for people who might not express themselves in the same way we do, right? So before I close out, T, did you have any final thoughts?
Yes, I used to say that the difference between eccentric and crazy is money. Because if you have lots of money and you're rich, you're eccentric. But if you have no money and you're living on the streets, you're crazy. I don't necessarily see it that way anymore. I see eccentric as just being, a deviation from some norm, from some norm, some unique personality trait that you have that gives you a fun characteristic in some way. When these characteristics become poisonous, like collecting other people in the case of Fajo, obviously these are things that have to be guarded against. But I don't necessarily see eccentric as, being related to crazy at all anymore. I think it's actually something that we should probably embrace more, and embrace our own eccentricness, or whatever the right word there is, and really, let our freak flag fly, if you will. And I think it's okay to do that. I think it's okay to say, you know, I'm eccentric or they're eccentric, and I think we should try and remove the stigma from that. And like we took back the word nerd, right? We took that back, and now it's something that we nerd out, and it's a cool thing to do, and we turn that into like maker, right? And so I think that there's an opportunity here to do the same thing with eccentric, and make it okay to be different or deviate from the norm in some way.
Right on. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, everyone, for nerding out with us every Sunday. This is and has been Star Trek Sundays on Clubhouse, and our regular show is Sunday at 10 a.m. PST. To be notified of future shows, please join the club on Clubhouse and our mailing list at StarTrekSundays.com. And next week, we'll be discussing the burden of command. And I really hope that everybody who is here can make it for next week. Thank you, everyone, for your contributions. It's been amazing. So I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Ciao.
Live long and prosper.